Okay. We go to, we need to modify the agenda, or not?
It's all right.
It's already on this? Oh, action, okay. So we'll take up next, action on personnel, item 4B. Is there a motion?
I move the request to waive liquidated damages due to the late resignations of Laura Kyle, Desiree McKee, and Denise Bowling not be waived.
Second.
Moved in second, any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? Passes 5-2. All right, the next item is the consent agenda.
I move to approve consent agenda items A through F.
Second.
Moved in second, all those in favor? 7. Old business, adoption of the 2020-2021 budget.
I move to adopt the 2020-2021 budget as published.
Second.
Moved in second, any discussion? All those in favor? 7. Token up.
This is gonna take a while, probably. There's a lot of things on the agenda. One of the things that I wanted to, I'm gonna steal the puck here real quickly. One of the things that we said we were gonna try to do between the last meeting and this meeting was to come up with some meeting criteria. We met for 17 hours last week, it seemed like. It was only about 4, but it sure felt like 7. The hard part about all of this is it is. It's not a map, so. There we go. So we met for several hours last week to try to figure out what's the best way to look at this. We did get the criteria. There we go. Oh, I have it. There we go. Okay. So we got the criteria from the Kansas State Department of Education, and also KDA also put out kind of a nicer version. When we met last week, or the time that we did meet, and you guys have this all in an email, it's also on the, it's also in your board docs. I had a little bit of trouble getting into that a little bit earlier today, believe it or not. So you guys got about 5,000 emails, I think, or 5,000 updates. I'm afraid that's the way it's going to be now until we get school with all this stuff. But as we met last week, and Mallory and Jennifer and Angela were involved in that meeting, we really had a tough time trying to wrap our head around how are we going to take that information and make something that could be manageable on a regular basis. Okay, so we had a few things that we agreed upon, but not very many at the end of that meeting. So over the weekend, as I was kind of reflecting a little bit and taking some of the stuff that we did agree upon, kind of came up with this, and this isn't where we're going to end up, but it gives us kind of a starting point. We're going to meet again tomorrow, and we're going to talk about how this can apply to, starting school. So if it were just in my world and I was the only one making this decision, as I've said before, what I would probably do, what I'd like to do, like around 4 o'clock on the Wednesday, the week prior, is, and we pull the data down and we make that decision for the next week, okay? I really don't want to make it 2 weeks out because a lot of things can change. I mean, we heard the rumor today of 40-some students on a near college campus that might have tested. I have not seen that for sure, as in fact, I hate to say it too loudly, but You know, a lot of things can change, but I think we need to have some stability, at least a week at a time for parents. So what we would do is during the time of Governor Kelly's emergency declaration, we would then pull the numbers down, but the values that we would consider, and we got these in a lot of discussion with the Hardin County Health Department, looking at the gating criteria that we were given from the state. The three most important values that the Hardin County Health Department thought we should probably use, the percent positive and trend numbers from the health department, then attendance values. Okay, so those three values, and you'll see that a little bit below. I assigned some numerical values to that because I don't like to be subjective at all. I like to be as objective as possible. First, over the weekend, when I sent this out to the group, I said, you know, green was 1, yellow 2, orange 3, and red 4. Well, when we look at green and we look at yellow, I'm trying to get this down here a little bit. When we look at the values with green and yellow, when you think about green, I'm going to try to pull, sorry about that, folks. This is a good map here. When you look at the difference in the values with green and yellow, like when you look at attendance, for example, in a green value, 3% above the baseline building level ADA. And we would probably use district level ADA to make this to where it's a calculable thing instead of going by each building. I think that would be really confusing for parents, okay? And that ADA stands for average daily attendance. So whatever your average daily attendance value was last year, you would use that and your 3%. If you're within 3% of that, you would be green.
Can we turn the volume down? There's crazy.
You like my tinny noise that comes from that?
Crazy feedback. Thank you.
When you look at the second gating criteria, which is that percent positive, if it's 5% or less, we would be green, okay? Then you look at the trend value, all right? The trend values are going to be either increasing, stable, or decreasing. So there's only 3 values there. Those would all be at 1.5. I just didn't think that the difference, and it's just me, and that's why we'll hash that out tomorrow at that committee tomorrow. I just didn't think the difference between between the green and the yellow was tremendously great in terms of the weighting itself, okay? Doesn't mean I'm right either, so we'll find that out tomorrow when we get together. When we look at the yellow, that ADA, if it's between 3 and 6% above, the percent positive, 5.1 to 9.9, and then if we have stable, that's yellow, okay? Now, sorry, when we get to orange, once again, orange on the trend is stable. Okay, it's stable. I probably should say stable instead of NA right here, but they're the same values. Okay, I should just type that in as we speak. But the value is still going to be the same. Actually, it's going to be a 2 with that because to me they're stable. I mean, so we would plug that in. But your percent positive goes from that 10 to 14.9. And somebody asked the question, what if it's 9.95 or whatever? Well, it's 9.9. I'm not going to round. I'm just going to take whatever that value is. So that way we're being consistent. Then if it's your ADA is above 10%, greater than or equal to 10% above the ADA, you're red. And if the percent positive is greater than or equal to 15%, and then if we're at an increasing trend, all right? So that's kind of how I look at that. And once again, we're just kind of starting this still. When we look at an average of 1.5, then what you would essentially do, like I pulled the values like on the 13th last week. I'm slow, okay. On the 13th, for example, we only could use staff because we don't have student values. So we're within 1%. You know, just guesstimating because I don't have an actual staff attendance value from last year yet, but we would use that for that very first week. Okay, we were green with respect to that. Our percent positive, so I assigned a value of 1.5. Our percent positive on that day was 10.5%, which put us in the orange. Give me this value, and we had a trend. The 14 days through July 29th, okay, and then the 14 days up through August 13th. That difference was 6 cases, so that was a positive trend. all right? So that was a red. So then we had an average score there of 228, meaning it was a high yellow, okay? What's kind of interesting about that, a couple of hours later, that percent positivity value went down, below the 10, which is, that's why you just gotta pick one point in time. You can't keep saying, okay, yeah, at 5 it was there, but at 6 it was there, we should do this, okay? You just gotta pick it to me, you gotta go. That way, you can get the information out to parents so they can plan, and the schools so that they can.
I have a question, it might be more for the, health department, but would they update their numbers? Is it like they do it at 4 o'clock every day, or they'll do it at noon and then they'll update more at 3 o'clock?
I don't have any idea because I was waiting all day long to plug the values in for today, and those values, at 6 o'clock tonight, when I came down here, they still had not changed. They still reflected last week's. And I don't know if it was because of what we heard in terms of a large number of cases or what. I have no idea. Okay, so we just go with the data that they have at that time.
Okay, so would it always be you or looking at the data at the exact same time every week?
I would say around 4 o'clock, between like 4 and 5 p.m. That's when we make that official. I just plug that time aside. That's when we look at this data.
And it would probably be good if the health department knew that as well.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, because I just don't want to be put in a situation where we make a decision at 4 and then at 6, it would have been a different decision.
Well, and that still may happen as well. And that's what you have to realize. It's just like I said, those values went down because they put more information in there.
But if we work with the health department and be in communication with
Sure.
them, I think we can avoid it as much as possible.
Yeah, but we also have to consider the health department, they only have 14 people working in the office, I think is what she said in a press conference today, working these cases. So they might not have the staffing to get that done for us. But I'm sure,
I would hope they would make it a priority. I mean, we're a pretty big entity in the community. and
well, yeah,
the
but they
health
also
and
did
the
have a press
county.
conference this afternoon too, which took us some time. So I'm just saying, those are details that I'm sure can be worked out, but.
So that's kind of where we are. Together, what we will look at is we will take that actual criteria that they reference in terms of activities, learning activities, school attendance. One of the things that we struggle with a lot, actually, and I'm still struggling with a little bit, and what the numbers mean, we look at, if that average is 1.5 up to, but not including 2, we're 100% full on site. Okay? 2, but not including 3, we're modified on site for pre-K through 12. What I mean by that is that we're 100% full attendance, but we have to somehow socially distance all the time, and that includes in the classroom. Okay? That means, honestly, we're going to have to look at some alternative sites, perhaps, in order to be able to make that work. And so I was really trying to not have to probably do that, just from a logistics perspective, with that many elementary schools, trying to get that many kids off campus, and thinking about, okay, how do we do lunch in those situations? How do we do this? How do we do that? I'm going to meet again tomorrow with elementary principals. There are some rooms, based upon us doing push-in with a lot of the specials, that might be open, so we might be able to spread out more. But what that will probably cause us to have to do is increase at least the number of aides that we have to help supervise some of those smaller groups of kids, so teachers can be within their cohorts. They can still be kind of floating among those groups of kids. None of this is great. None of this is going to be perfect. But we really need to, if we're going to be on site, what it allows us to do with up to level 3 there, or up to numerical value 3, is to get those pre-K through kids, pre-K through 6th grade students here on campus a large part of the time, as long as things aren't any different or any worse than they are now, which is one of the recommendations that both the KSE gate criteria and the KNEA indicated that we want to do with that. If we were to go to 3, from 3 up to but not including 4, we would be in that full hybrid mode for those elementary kids, pre-K through 6. Okay? Meaning we would mirror what the high school would be doing in that level 2 for that hybrid environment. All right? And then they would be fully remote in grade 7 through 12. And then 4 above is remote for everyone. Okay? I think if we got to 4 as an average, I think there's a lot of other things that are going south for us. So, just kind of wanted your feedback. I know this is probably a little hard to understand, maybe, a little bit. But for those of us that spent 3 hours talking about this last week, after that hour, it's probably not.
I think it's important to talk about why it's different for pre-K 6 versus 7, 12, and yellow and orange. Do you want to talk about
Sure, I mean, one of the things with our younger kids, I mean, there's a couple of lines of thought as it relates to this. The one is that those pre-K through 6 kids, because of their age, they're not as susceptible, to being symptomatic in terms of if they have the virus, okay? Now, and so a lot of folks are focusing on that, but, there's also, with this being a novel virus, I really want to put that stipulation out there. That's what that means, is it's novel. And when we look too at the uptake of cases in those elementary grades over the last, 20 or 30 days in other places, there are more kids showing up with that. So, but that is the reason to have them on site. That's one of the reasons. The other one for me, seriously, is finding that balance between the need for that custodial care for those age levels. I mean, our parents are still working. I mean, they have to have that in order to be able to provide for their families. There are some other things that we can look at from that perspective. That goes back to using some other facilities. Lynette Bennington from the Harvey County Health Department shared a letter with me that the KDHE, we can't open a daycare because we're not licensed to do that, but we can hire instructional support staff in the form of aides that could be providing some of that custodial care, even if we're in that hybrid environment for some of those things. But for sure, that leads me to believe that we could do that modified on-site if we've got to have some aides and have those kids on so we can get most of those elementary kids in. This is a real tough thing for me because there's also research that talks about the kids that the viral load in a lot of those littles is just as bad, if not worse, than in adults. And so I think we're going to find out as we go, the information will just evolve over time. And we've got to be sensitive to that. So if we notice we have a lot of cases in that elementary, we need to rethink this, what we're doing in terms of this criteria, and make an adjustment in it to make sure that all of our students and our staff are safe. So it's a starting point. It really is. And I think we go a week at a time. That's what I would like to do. I don't really want to make a blanket statement for the whole semester, because if things do change, or the whole 9 weeks, if things do change, we're locked in. I just hate backing up when folks make plans. And I'll take any other input you folks have. I've talked enough already.
Well, I just wanted to say, I'm really grateful that you were looking at the pre-K through 6, trying to really get them into the classroom. I just think that is so important. And I know you and I talked a little bit, and there's other issues for them, not just family issues. There's issues for small kids, and so I just think it's so important. And I'm glad that we're looking in that direction, trying to do that. And with older kids, 7 through 12, I'm much more in agreement that a hybrid is not that detrimental to them down the road. It's fine, so I think it'll work. It'll work good. I mean, I want everybody in the classroom, but I realize this is a very unusual situation. So I like the way you kind of have it up here. I think, I don't know what the committee has thought as you were working through this. Is this kind of agreed upon?
We need
It was
to
a lot.
A lot of thought.
No? Okay. And what were the issues that were troubling, or that you guys were going, so that the rest of us can kind of
I
understand?
think one of the biggest things, and Angela brought this up several times, is we would love to have consistency, throughout the district. But one of the biggest issues is custodial care, not just for our working parents, but our staff members as well. I mean, how do you expect them to teach their students while they have to take care of their own children and help them through their remote learning? So, it's a struggle because you want people to be as safe as possible, but that is the role that education has played forever, is we provide a place for their young children to go and learn while their parents go to work. And I don't think we can dismiss that as something that that's not important, because it is very important too.
I have a question, when you say the modified on-site, is that something, well, that's a word,
That's a little bit
Yeah, that
different,
you
yeah.
thought of since we met.
Yeah, because I hated that they had hybrid, the asterisks.
Yeah.
You know, so I
So
just thought.
are you saying for that, it would be keeping those pre-K, to 6 in groups of 15?
That would be our goal, to really.
And so we would have to find space.
We will.
If we need to do that, okay.
Yeah, and we're reaching out right. There are rents, if we go to rent spaces, if we can, get some stuff, for some churches or something like that, that's who I reached out to the Ministry of Alliance contact. And that was just via email yesterday, because I really tried to stay away from that, because I'm seriously thinking of logistics. We can easily say, oh yeah, the kids can just walk down there, but if it's raining, I'm not wanting the kids to walk down in the rain for that. And what about lunch? How do we deal with lunches? And all those logistical issues are just gonna be a pain in the tail to
And
do.
transportation
Oh.
overall.
Absolutely. And so we're trying to weigh all of that, but really, I don't think we can do something like that modified on-site without having access to some other facilities to house some of those kids.
Another question is, I was pretty sure the new principal of Santa Fe was saying she would feel comfortable in 5th and 6th graders in the 7 to 12 category.
She was.
Okay, so.
I'm not as comfortable over the
Okay.
weekend as I thought about
I
that.
was like, is that a mistake, did something happen?
No,
Okay.
and I shared that with Denise.
Okay.
I'm just not as comfortable, only because I think of things that I did as a 5th or 6th grader. I can't remember that back then. But, leaving those kids, 7, 12 kids, because we can also do some things differently with hybrid than for 7, 12, than we can for 5 and 6, from a self-regulation perspective and stuff.
Okay.
If we're in hybrid like 7 through 12, I think if we're in hybrid, I say, okay, those kids in 7, 12 hybrid, if they're not on campus, they've got to be in there that hour online with those teachers as they're working with kids, at least to set up the opportunity and then to collect attendance and things like that, and make that people contact. I think it's a lot harder to do that for those 5th and 6th graders.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure I had that right in my head. And then, so, like on the yellow line, we say 2 up to not including 3.
Yes.
So a 2.9 would be yellow.
Yes.
But a 3 would be orange.
Yes.
Okay.
I've got a question.
Go for it.
So, why do we start at 1.5 instead of 1?
Well, I just thought that those two ranges are so close, I'm not sure it's worth double the amount from 1 to 2, you know? And like I said, Luke, I don't care that much, I actually do, but I just didn't think from a multiplying effect that it made that much difference.
I just didn't know if we were copying somebody else or.
No, I initially, since I'm so creative, it was 1, 2, 3, 4. And then over the weekend, as I put some thought into that, I thought, I just don't see the difference between those two things. When you think about it, we're 100% for the pre-K through 6 in both, it's just a different way, and we're hybrid in the 7 through 12. So yeah, I'll do this, and you just tell me which, it may not work great, but.
Next question is on the attendance, like when we're talking about trends, we mentioned 2-week time parameter on attendance. What's the time range that we're looking at? Are we looking at the last week's attendance? Just the dates, you pull the data of that day's attendance?
I would pull the attendance for that day. I don't know, and that's one thing we can talk about tomorrow, whether we should take a week's average from the previous weeks of that. That has not been set in stone necessarily. But that would be something that we could take the average.
Day to day, I would think that would change quite a bit.
Might be good to put an average. in there.
Especially, I just feel like this year, people are being pretty encouraged to stay home if they have any symptoms whatsoever.
What has Jane got to deal with you when she shows you some of those checklists?
Yeah, so I think staying within 3% is going to be probably pretty tough, but, we'll see. The other thing on the trends, decreasing, increasing, or stable, from the example, I think there's an increase of 4.
One was a 4, one was a 6.
Okay, and so I guess what my question is, if we're sitting at 100 cases in the county, active cases, and we decrease by 1, should that really be given the green category? And then vice versa, if we're sitting at 2 cases, and we say we stay stable, or we went from 2 to 3. If we went from 2 to 3, I would say, oh my gosh, we're in the red. We should be you should give it
Well,
that
so
level.
that does make a good point, because stable would have to be the exact same number.
Absolutely.
So should there be a window in between there if it's within 5? I'm just throwing that around.
Welcome to our meeting.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, so we talked about-
Right, it explodes after a while. But really, should there be a window, and then under that is decreasing, and above that is increasing? Because even Lynette said several different times, if I had to categorize us now, we would be stable, but then when they ran the numbers, she goes, well, okay, yeah, we're increasing. But in her opinion, it had been pretty stable, even though it was a little up and down.
Yeah, I think it might be helpful to clarify how you calculate that.
Oh, I
Like,
knew you
we
were
went
gonna
over it a
do
little.
that. Oh.
It's, because I think people are thinking of number of cases versus number of cases, and it's a little bit of that.
Sheila, will you get Fred a wheelchair? He's not- Maybe a wheelchair, because
Like, the
he's not
first
old
thing we
enough.
learned about it is that it's like these chapters.
There really should be a level of tolerance in what we do.
Well, see, we talked about that, we talked about that for 2 hours on Wednesday, and really, it all goes back to, you know, when you come down, it increases and increase.
And then someone has to make this decision, you
Yes.
can't leave it up to someone's judgment, it has to be.
I want objective measure.
Yeah, mathematically based.
So a one increase or decrease throws us into a new level,
Yes,
either way.
We've got
Yes.
2 colors, that it's gotta be the exact same number to get that value.
That's unstable for telling families what they're gonna do with their kids.
We can
On a
write it out
weekly basis.
tomorrow.
If we can go up, down, one or down, I mean, well, let's look back at 2 weeks and then saying, well, we went up 1 in the last 2 weeks, so that totally changed everything, we're gonna operate different this week, so.
But it's.
And you can have a situation, I'm sorry, you can have a situation like today, where it was a mass testing, so obviously your numbers are inflated, even though it ended up being about the same
percent positive,
percent
yes.
positive that we normally have, but clearly that's gonna make us go, whoop, now you're increasing.
I think one thing to think of though is it's not just this one metric that we're looking at it with this.
Right.
So this could be red, but everything else could be green, which would put us,
Yeah, our average would be what it is. Yeah, you have to do the math.
yeah, so
So
it's
we-
not, so one case isn't gonna put us in remote.
Well, and I guess just thinking off the cuff here, my thought would be that maybe increase, decrease, or stable, it doesn't get as much weight. That's it. Like,
I think we talked about that too, and it's just hard because we're trying to make it simple for the community to understand, and not just like, oh, well, they made this so complicated because they just wanna randomly pick where you're at this week. We want it to be understandable, but it's difficult
It's very good.
to find this balance.
So what you would do there, Luke, since you're the one that brought this up,
Yeah.
okay? So we would count back 14 days, and you look up here, that says positive numbers, 163. So when we, then, okay, then you would go back to this 163, which is right, wherever that was, right here, okay? Then we would draw that bar back 2 more weeks. And so it's like 2 weeks, you're kind of going back 4 weeks is what you're kind of doing. You're looking every week, it bumps up a week. So then you would pick that number, that difference between them. So I did mark down that date, so that's not going to be very helpful. So that's what I hate this, is because every time I, so if we go back 14 days here, right there. So that was
So the first one-
163, and,
So the last 2 weeks was 163 versus 222, right? Which is 59.
so 108 and 163. So the first value,
So Lynette did say that they could put a portion on their graph to simplify this, so we wouldn't have to do or that people wouldn't have to do the subtracting and try to figure out how it's calculated. That they could add that if that's what we decided.
So it's 55 versus 59.
We're still up in the air, so.
yeah, so it would be an increase of 4. So that's how you guys, that's how they said we had to calculate that. So that's the only complicated piece of that. That one we can do fairly quickly. So,
And we as a district are gonna calculate that, or the.
well, once they put it on the dashboard, we just gotta pull the data from here. But the other data piece is there, the attendance we would have to calculate, but And the ADA is what would be reported, you know, to the state in terms of our average daily attendance for all of last year.
And is this how the other districts in the county are doing it as well?
Well, not necessarily, because, you know, I met for about an hour and a half Friday afternoon with the other suits, and, you know, they like that we're looking at this numerically, but like one of the suits said, we talked about this in our meeting. I struggle if this is the true number of active cases. Now, it's not now, because like I said, if you look here, the last this was updated was the 14th, so we're still talking like last Friday. But if there's only 20 active cases, now I'm struggling with that one. You know what I mean? But that's not one of the methods, that's one of the things too, when we had that conversation, that's not one of the metrics that the state talked about for KDA in terms of using the criteria, for the number of active cases. So then how would we apply a metric?
But,
You could go green, yellow, red with the number of active cases. I mean, it would be.
But what would
just
your
as
reference
arbitrary as
point be?
Putting 1.5 on that, or.
But what would your reference point be? You know what I mean? At what number would you become alarmed?
Yeah,
I think
you'd be
it's,
picking the number, you'd be going off with recommendations,
Yes.
but
they're not recommending it, we look at the data like that. If we
Yeah.
wanted to look at active cases, the closest metric would have been the incident per 100,000 or
Yes.
whatever, which that would have put us in, that metric was red last time we looked at it.
It was red, it would stay red for quite some time, you know, you'd have to have a pretty big decrease. So, you know, it's interesting, we're gonna meet again tomorrow. I'm not trying to get off of this, because if you have other interest, there's a bunch of other things you're gonna go over.
Right, but that's what I think, and Fred and I talked about this a little bit, was, is there input that you guys want from us that are gonna be working on this?
I think one of the biggest pieces that we wrestled with a lot was the difference between the younger kiddos and the older kiddos, and that it's not just about custodial care, or just about the education piece. Is that these younger kids, well, not all kids are safe at home to begin with, regardless of age, so that's a thing to consider. But with these younger kids, if they're in a hybrid mode, are they able to log on to do all of their things on their computer if they don't have an adult at home or not? Are they able to feed themselves at home without an adult or not? So where our older kids do have some of those advantages being older, but our younger kids are gonna struggle with a lot more than just education. So it becomes a safety issue where it's not just limited to the safety or exposure of COVID, but also just basic meeting their needs, being fed in a safe place. So I think a lot of us were wrestling with that one way or another of, do we divide by age group or go consistent across the board? And personally, I like having the division, because I do think that there's needs that our younger kids have that can't be met at home in a hybrid. Granted, they will likely end up there at some point, but I think we really need to take a look, because consistency doesn't really mean the best thing for all kids when their needs are significantly different at a younger age, from my standpoint.
So do you want input from everybody on that issue?
I think that would be helpful.
Okay.
Fred, what do you
Yeah,
think?
and I struggled with that more last week. I kind of wrapped my head around it only because, you know, I think if we can spread them out,
Yeah.
if we can do that, I feel a lot better. I don't feel great if we have them all on those campuses and, you know, 25 kids in a room.
So that brings me to the point of, we didn't have numbers of kind of enrollment numbers, class numbers. We didn't have that when we were fighting last week. So we can fight about that tomorrow, which I look forward to.
You're gonna have some in there.
Perfect. So I think that was up in the air. We really didn't know, how many kids are we dealing with? What's that gonna look like? So it's hard, because it's what comes first, the chicken or the egg, we don't know. So hopefully that will help. But personally, I would like to kind of know where the board's at as far as dividing by grade level, if that's okay.
So
I don't see any issue with that. For me, if anything.
and you've got children in every single age category.
Yeah. So, if anything, for me, it seems like it's real easy to get kids out of school, easier than what I would have expected. So, whether there's a more chance of pre-K through 6 staying in school versus having to go, I agree with that. But overall, I see it being very easy to go into yellow and very easy to go into orange. And when I don't know, when I look at 20 active cases, knowing the calls that I've done, the entire EMS, I'm not super alarmed.
So you're saying you wish it were weighted so they would be in classrooms more? Is
Yeah.
that what I'm understanding?
Okay, that's how I feel about it.
Well, one thing that I don't think we thought about, so in order for them to be red, to be a 4, it can't be above, because
Right.
your biggest number is a
Is
4.
a 4.
That you're
Yeah.
averaging,
On
so
the
everything would have to be
Everything
red.
is just pretty
to
darn
use
red.
that.
It really has to get.
Okay, because I was like 4 or above,
Yellow.
that's just wonky math, I don't think we're gonna get above 4, so.
And we could adjust that down to say like 3.75, 4. I have no
We're gonna
affinity.
fight about that too.
Yeah, I have nothing tied to any of these things, other than I just want to have something, because we need to move forward.
And I'm just gonna give this little side note. I hope that people see the distress this is causing, because we really are trying to sort through every little piece and consider all sides. So this isn't just like we're throwing something out there for people. We are working very hard
Well,
to make this work.
And just to kind of, we really haven't talked even with the elementary principals about this modified, piece until today. That was just with the principals during another meeting that I was having with them, or that she was having actually, that I jumped in on, because there's so much of this that we still have to get fixed up between now and September the 3rd. So we've got a ton of stuff still to accomplish.
Oh, I'm fine.
You like this idea of?
Yeah, I mean, the more kids we can get in the buildings, the better, but, given the circumstances, the younger kids are gonna be easier to keep in the building, given the risk factors.
I mean, I've talked about this a lot already, so I don't feel like I have much to add to the other two that are on this committee. The only thing that I will advise us is to not make these decisions with the goal of getting closer, it being easier to be in one color, being easier to be in another color. We should do this with trying to keep safety of kids and staff and our community in mind. So yeah, really, it kind of bothers me when I hear, oh, but we'll never get to a green, or we'll never get to a yellow. Let's not think that way, we have to just think mathematically.
Yeah, I love the fact that we're looking at separating that for a multitude of reasons. Having worked in hundreds of these homes, a lot of our kiddos over the years, you get a lot of insights to a lot of different things that happen in homes and abilities to take care of those kiddos and how we're structuring it. And I love the fact that you guys have reached out to some local people and local entities to try to figure out what we need to do to transition to help our families by doing that. So I'm just impressed to hear that all this stuff is being beaten up by 100 different angles, and I'm 100% confident in what's happening in the process, and I know you're going to beat up 100 more things, and I appreciate all the time it's taken to do that. So
One thing I want to make clear, Andy, is we're just now beginning to reach out to those. That was just yesterday when I sent that first email. You know what I
Yeah,
mean?
that's
So
amazing.
it's not, we've not made contact with them yet, so I don't want anybody to listen to this to think
Right.
that we spent 15 hours taking phone calls. We have not yet, so.
And I think we also have to be ready for that not to work out, and for us to have to go back to the hybrid and yellow.
or look for other alternatives. I think just thinking out the box like that,
Yeah.
and being willing to make those contacts and seeing what's out there. I love that process. So it's beautiful.
So I've given a lot of my opinion. During the meeting last week, we listened to a Zoom call from Dr. Watson, and I took a lot of notes. And one of his points was that our goal is on-site as much as possible with precautions. I think most educators would agree that that's the ideal place for our kids and their ideal learning environment, but obviously COVID-19 further mentioned that. And another key piece that he mentioned we have to think about is some of our poverty kids, some of our kids who they aren't safe at home. They aren't safe either way. their parents are not at home, and he said to keep these kids in the forefront of our minds. And I keep coming back to, we have strong advocates for a fully remote option, and parents who advocate for these students, and they will utilize that mode, and they will do exceptionally well. We have to have advocates for the kids that are in the shadows, who don't have a parent advocate at home, who don't have someone standing up and saying, my kid's not eating, my kid's not safe. So I personally feel like we have to fight extra hard for these kids to take care of them in every possible way.
And we'll probably need a special meeting to approve this, or you can.
Probably, yes.
Okay, and I already said my piece, I really like the idea of two different groups, and I'm glad you expanded to just do sixth grade, I think that's good, so. Any other speaking points that you guys want to input on? No? Okay, I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. We got, operations update. Jane is gonna talk to you about all the things that they do, and as she's going there, I'm gonna say that they really put together some pretty cool stuff. And that should be in your folder with some checklists and stuff.
A little nervous here, everybody watching me do technology. Okay, good.
I'm right behind you, Jane. Way
I can
behind you.
feel the support.
So Fred, in deciding September 3rd is the first day of school.
Yes.
So we'll look at this gating criteria and have that out on the 26th, which
That
is
would be my goal.
the festival.
That's the Wednesday.
That would be the Wednesday before.
Okay.
What will your rating on attendance for that?
We'll use staff attendance, that's the only thing we can use. And honestly, I'm not sure if it's really valid to use student attendance for a couple of groups sometimes. So, but we'll see what kind of values we do. We'll probably use it well.
Jane,
Yes.
do you mind taking your mask off, or are you comfortable with that?
I am if everybody else is comfortable with
That would
that.
be a lot easier for you.
So operations, we did training for district-wide staff last Tuesday as part of the professional learning day. It was pretty interesting. We were on a Google Meet with everybody across the district. So we started just by reviewing the document of operations, just touching on those highlights. And then we had each of them read through it more in depth. So that they could have a good feeling for what was on there. We then, Megan Nagel, created a COVID parking lot for your burning questions. So we opened that up that morning, and I learned for the first time that Google can get overloaded. We had people that could not get in there to ask their burning questions. So it was pretty amazing. We have 17 pages worth of questions. We started that morning answering some of those questions across the call so that we could look through those. And then we ran out of time, of course, with 17 pages. So after that, the operations team met this past Friday for over 2 hours, going back through that document and answering the remainder of those questions. However, we still did not get it done. And so we met today for a little over an hour to finish answering the staff's questions. So we finished that, but then we also went through our checklist and what we kind of like to call protocols. So the school nurses, led by Karen Lehman, have been working the last 6 days on and off on some health office checklist, return to school after exclusion, temp check, screening checklist, so that everybody in district and parents will have access to these to be able to know, okay, my child is sick, what should my steps be? So for instance, we have a temperature screening check. The top portion here is from the executive order that will temp check anybody that comes in the building for the first time each day. So staff and students arrive wearing your mask, of course, staying 6 feet apart from each other as you're in line, And then you're coming up to the kiosk. If you have a normal temp, you get to enter the building. If you have a temp 100.4 or greater, you get to wait 5 minutes and be rescreened. A 5-minute wait period is important because if kids are just coming in from outside, they could be hot, there needs to be that temperature adjustment for them. So from there, their option is that's less than 100.3 and they get to go into the building, or it's over, they cannot go into the building, and then they're going to be sent home. So we contact the parent to come pick them up, and then staff should go home and follow their normal building's absence procedure. So that's one. This will be for classroom teachers, depending on what needs to happen if the student needs to go see the school nurse. So are there things that the classroom teacher can take care of, providing a Band-Aid, giving a restroom break, a stretch break, a water break, and so forth. And so it's Karen and her nurse team, made yes and no's and where you would go from there on all of those. They also did a student presents with a health need, so this is going to be a very important one for building administrators and your administrative assistants to walk through. And let's see. And then return to school after exclusion. So this one is a little bit more detail. So if you have a potential COVID case, what it looks like if the person is tested, what it looks like if the person is untested or has not gotten a test, and so forth down through this lovely chart. Any questions?
That one was important because the temperature of 100.4 or greater, and if it's not explained by medical diagnosis, then you've got to exclude for 10 calendar days. And that's one of the reasons why, Karen and her group sat down and came up with this, because we really did, okay, what do we do in that situation? So you're, as a parent, if your kid was sent home, if there's no way to explain it by a medical diagnosis, you have to understand your kid has to stay home for those 10 days. And so that's, that educational piece of getting that information out to parents in the way they understand that. Because that's different than with the flu or, with other things in the past years.
So I know this jumps into the realm of instructional, but if they just have a fever but otherwise can function, are those kids, are we recommending that they do remote learning while they're home, or they're just missing 10 days?
They'll have to, probably as if they were not remote necessarily, but just as if you were flexible, you got to make up those assignments somehow. So I'm sure that, depending upon what mode we were in, will have to be the same sort of accommodation it would be for a regular sort of absence. It's just, it would be dependent upon that level. So I would say not going remote necessarily, because they would not have that, that.
Not permanently moving to remote, but just, would they be able to log on with the remote teacher? I know they've been working through bands of curriculum, so essentially people should be on the same module week to week. Is that a correct understanding? I'm just thinking.
Not 100% there.
What if Billy has a temperature of 100.4 multiple months? What if he comes the second day of school with temp and he's out for 10 days and then comes again in October, and not necessarily COVID, but kids get fevers. And so we're looking at, 20 days in 2 months, that is, not school days, but lots of school days, that's huge. So I feel like we need to have a plan on.
They would go get a diagnosis. I'm sure that's not.
You would hope, but some can't.
But, I'm taking my kid to the doctor with a temp and they go, it's virus, but it's not strep throat, it's not,
Well,
yeah.
If they could say it's not COVID related, they think it's a virus or something like that, that goes back to not explain, if it's explained by medical diagnosis of some sort, got a history of sinus infections or something like that, we would be able to take it from that.
And I do want to share that all of these were shared with the health department with Toby, and kind of vetted through him to make sure that we were looking at all the rights, how long they need to be out and all of those steps. And they felt that these were following all of their guidelines that they're following also.
So if they are out for this waiting period, whatever it is, if they are doing their work and staying engaged, does that count as an absence or not?
I don't feel that's my place to answer.
So just for anybody, I don't know.
We haven't even talked about it, honestly. You know, would we then switch to a remote type of thing and be able to, I don't know. I don't have that answer. I'd like to say, yeah, we can do that. I don't have half of them.
I wrote those questions down, though. Yeah. I just, I wanna make sure we're keeping kids on track as much as possible.
Absolutely.
And we're gonna be more diligent than we've ever been, about sending kids home if they're right at that temp, and we don't want them to fall grossly behind.
Absolutely.
If they can function at home, then I hope that we can find a way to let them do remote work to at least stay somewhat engaged.
That's where I was gonna go. My question is, they're out these 10 days, what are we providing for them to do work at home?
Sorry.
So you're good, that's a good,
No.
it's a good
Off
question,
track.
yeah.
Like I said, that's kind of how the temperature, what do we do? And that's we get to that point, we need to be pushed to that other point about prepping.
I mean,
That's what it is.
this is great,
Yes,
and I
yeah.
completely am on board. It's just, okay, so what if we're in that situation, what does it look like for the kids, so.
I have to say that operations is an amazing group of people, and the things, we're making hard decisions, and it's not fun to make those tough decisions, but we really are truly trying to keep the best interest of our students and our staff and families in mind. But we can sit and talk about one conversation for 20 minutes because it's so difficult to decide what is that best thing to do with whatever that topic is. So, like I said, great group of people to work with. Very excited to have these done, getting ready to send out to staff in the next couple of days. So they have that right in front of them to go through. So that's all I had.
And you will be having another operations training next week.
I don't know when, but we will. So we'll all do an operations training going over these, all those checklists, so that staff can ask their questions as they go. We're going to do it with administrators first, and then do it as a district-wide, just so we can make sure we are really set on what those steps are. So even as we read through them, sometimes it can get a tad bit confusing, so we want to make sure we all understand before we share with everybody.
I have something that's probably operations related. The Harvey County Medical Society sent all of us a letter recently. One of their points, number 4, is we ask that you calculate ventilation safety in every building and ideally in every wing or room of the district. And they give us some resources to help calculate ventilation safety. Is this, I've never heard of a ventilation safety calculation. So is this something that we've already done, that we're looking into?
We're looking into exchange rates in those classrooms in terms of the ventilation. And we had said before that we were looking to get the ACE or the HEPA filters, okay? That's not going to be possible. And the reason it isn't because of supply, number 1. Some of those HVAC systems, number 2, cannot handle those kinds of filters because of the balance with respect to the air coming in, going through the filters and then going out. They have to be in balance. Okay? We can't, with the age of some of our units and frankly the condition of some of our units, putting those filters in would not be a positive outcome for us in terms of having to replace them even sooner than we're going to have to. We are trying to acquire some of those UV light filters to place on in some of those areas. I think Chris, I'm not sure if he submitted the PO, I believe that he did secure last week the PO for that, to try to get several of those units, like 18 of those units to place in some of our higher travel areas. But I'm not sure, I reached out to a couple of HVAC guys that I know, they say that they're pretty good. But then I've heard others say that maybe they're not as good. So this is the thing that bothers me a lot, is that we don't have a good handle on that. We're supposed to, like I said, getting the air exchange rates tested. But in some of those rooms, there's not windows and stuff that open to get outside fresh air, things like that. So, this is a struggle. There's not a good answer for this.
But we are planning to at least test.
Yes, yes. And the air exchange rates, yes.
Is that the,
In each one of the buildings.
is air exchange rate the same thing as the ventilation safety?
I'm gonna be honest, they sent that letter yesterday, and I've not read through all those resources they have.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure that's something that we look into. But you're saying most likely we don't really have the best ventilation.
We don't have the best HVAC units.
Well, that's not a surprise.
Well, I mean, we
Yeah.
just don't.
No, I know.
They're old, and there are like three, we're looking to replace one, it's kind of it was in that update that I sent from the maintenance department in this COVID section. There's one that's being started right now, and I can't remember which building it is, honestly. And then there's the two that are on the capital plan for the year. We're still talking a ton of additional HVAC units that, we just are where we are with this. So, and there was the thing about getting air purifiers and stuff like that. I don't know what that would entail, what kind of air purifiers they're talking about, but you're talking about hundreds of classrooms. There's a pie, and we're trying to prioritize that to make sure that we can have staff and stuff like that too. So we're not gonna make anybody happy with a lot of the decisions that we have to make with these things.
Anything else on this?
She's got instructional, Sheila's got instructional.
Oh, she was,
Yeah.
sorry. Very fast answers you. Oh, that's good. They did. Be or not.
All right, as Jane was sharing, a lot of the professional learning that was going on last week was all about operations. And so big task for all of them to go through, because teachers wanted to know what all of those things were that you were seeing up there. And part of some of their task was just to work through some of the things they were experiencing from walking into the building. We should have had each of you do that tonight. I could have done their check.
Oh, yeah.
We did.
We did. Yeah, right. Okay.
So what that would look like as far as logistics, the temperature check, social distancing, and being able to practice some of that for what the information that they knew. Like Jane said, there was still a lot there to be working on. But probably some of the other things, and more importantly, that we were also working on was just the care for self-regulation of staff, how they're working through all of those things and being in that group when maybe they weren't used to being around a lot of other people. And so how were they feeling? How were their students feel? Giving them some things to really work through on that. And then we also worked on giving them some professional learning and just working with the Google tools, whether it was using Meet, slides, and all of that. I will echo a couple of things that I heard in that we all kind of divided and conquered and went to some of the buildings and staff. And a couple of the ones I were in were just saying, I'm ready to be around my students. They miss them, they have not seen them, and the struggle is real because they still want the safety part of it, but they want to see their kids. I think that's pretty general all the way across the board, and how can we all do that? We also talked a little bit this last week about even then how do we work through some de-escalation techniques. So knowing how we are all right now, I mean, we can sit here and talk because we have the time and do all of that, but things are going to be interesting when everybody gets together, and we've had some of those moments even with just staff. I mean, some are a little more on edge, including myself at times. We're tired, we're working hard. All of the staff are, from administrators to teachers to everybody that you've been in contact with. And so how can we help each other as we go through all of that, and then we're going to also pass that on to our students. So finishing 5 days of professional learning, another thing is just not having that much
all in a row. I mean, that was huge. So now we've got another 5 days this week. So if we thought last week was intense, this is gonna be even more so. So we had Brad Neuenschwander kick off today, heard him a little bit, talking about the navigating change document, gave us a little bit of an overview. Talked to staff a little bit about how to dive into that, how that might help. What does that mean, and looking at it, and really thinking about a lot of what we were saying earlier in depending upon what environment we're in. As a teacher, I want to be setting up my pacing guide for the year, and what is reasonable to be able to get to the end of the year with students knowing that, like even Jennifer was saying, okay, what about the ones that are sick? Even if it's not COVID related, how are we going to work through that? But then ones that might be or need to be quarantined and all of those kinds of things. So they just started today with that. We have an amazing group of teacher leaders that have been working even more hours than what we've been doing with them during the day to try to lead the groups that they're with. Megan Nagel has been putting in a ton of time with them on all of that and trying to help them, as has Ken and Graver. So I appreciate everything that they're doing. By the end of the week, the goal is that they're unpacking the standards. They've got a pacing guide, and they hope to have maybe up to a month's worth of lessons. That sounds like a really tall task, and so we're going to see how well we can accomplish all of that. And then trying to have that alignment both on the horizontal and vertical. They've also got some information in that guidance document to be looking at common assessments, some of those rubrics in there, trying to interpret that. What does that mean? And this all ties back still to the strategic plan. I will say one thing though that has been definitely a part of everything that we've been doing. We know that we anticipate it with our students, and we're getting a lot of practice with it. And that is, we think that we have a plan for the day, and then something isn't quite ready, and so we get to shift. So one of the things that we've been waiting for, and I know Jody has been working extremely hard in trying to get the sync between Infinite Campus and Canvas. And we were scheduled to start with that today. We put it off until tomorrow. We waited until 3 o'clock today to make that decision. It still wasn't quite ready, so we're being flexible, but we're getting a little bit antsy in that. When will it be? And it's anything on Jody's part. It's those two companies working with each other to make all of that data sync and be ready. So when you were asking, Jennifer, about what will families do, one thing that's going through my mind is if a student is absent, we haven't talked through any of those logistics, we haven't had that part. But with the Canvas and the learning management system is that as the teachers are thinking about their lessons this week and developing those, that once we have the training on Canvas, then they can upload all of that into Canvas. So if I'm that English teacher, let's say, and Fred is in my class and he needs to be out for a while, I just don't know if it would be that he's coordinating with me as his classroom teacher, or like you were maybe insinuating going with a remote teacher. I think we need to work through some of those things yet, but knowing if that's the intent, that all the teachers can upload their lessons through there, I think the material is going to be available. We just have to sort out which one would they be working through, and maybe it's the length of time, too, as to when the student is not able to be with the rest of their peers. Otherwise then, today we met with our administrators and thinking about also those remote teachers. We've been asking for interest and who's wanting to do that. We had posted an application, and that was due Friday night at midnight. I'm looking at Jane on that, and so that was just internal, asking teachers who were interested. So we're still working on finalizing that list. As soon as we know who all that is going to be for those pre-K 6, then we want to pull them in and say, okay, now let's work through some of the guardrails on that. Another task that we don't have that down on paper, so we're going to be doing that together and trying to define what that looks like. And then another thing, as I was looking at the strategic plan, then next week we've also got time put in for professional learning for family engagement, and that also looks much different than what we've done in the past. We've got a checklist, kind of like operations has been doing, but we still need to put a lot of more a lot more effort into that as to what that might look like when we have families and students come in, and or when we, could also offer an online session with them, so they can hopefully have as much support as they need once we're ready to start educating our kids.
It's a lot of stuff.
It is a lot of stuff.
I have a couple questions. And these may be ones that we don't have an answer to, but maybe we need to think about. So, for the remote teachers, are you planning on one, like, per grade? I know that gets hairy when we get into high school, even the 7th and 8th grade age group. But is that kind of the plan?
Kind of, sort of. So what we're looking at right now is pre-K 6, we were looking at the numbers as how many students and an approximate class size and all that. So some of them, we've got maybe a 1st grade, 2nd grade combination, depending upon the number of students. Maybe there's another one where there's just a 3rd grade teacher. But in thinking about what we've worked with Chisholm and the high school is that they've got a little bit of a different approach in that. And I know Chisholm is working that into their day. They had about the approximate number of students per pod. And so their teams are working together to see how they can support those students. And then high school is still also working on that as well. I'm kind of looking at Joey and Caleb to see if I'm saying that right, if you want to add anything to that.
Joey put together, Chisholm put together a really cool plan to try to do that internally. It's really a neat, schedule for staff to together.
So that kind of leads into, so if we have, I saw the remote student count. So if at the end of the 1st semester, half of those kids now want to move to on-site, they're being pushed back into their normal attendance center, elementary wise, and we just make adjustments as needed.
Right, that way, right.
And then I probably should ask Jane, what's our plan then if a teacher is sick or quarantined, a classroom teacher?
Right. So we've talked just briefly about that, and again, going back to the campus tool and that every teacher, whether they're remote or on-site, they're going to be uploading their lessons. And then we're also encouraging them to be thinking this week about, like, if I'm already on a team or in a department, like, how can I continue my collaboration so that if I'm ill, Fred could go ahead and at least be aware of where are my students, where are they in my content. That's at least the initial thing. We've got a lot of,
it'll look mostly normal for students. They'll have a substitute teacher.
maybe, yeah, maybe.
I'm just thinking, like, if a teacher's quarantined, say they test positive, is their class now remote to quarantine along with them? Are they still in the classroom with their teacher remotely? What does that look like?
It could maybe be, yes, it depends on the teacher, maybe they're in quarantine, but they're not ill, so maybe we're remoting a teacher into the class, that might be. If the teacher is too ill, regardless of COVID or another reason, then we're gonna have to figure out what some solutions might be, like Fred was saying. We would hope that we can get a sub, but even before now, that was not a simple task. I know we've been working with some that are long-term subs, just with some staff that have some long-term absences coming up for other reasons. So we're trying to also bring them in in fact, I can think of 2 of them, looking at Jane, 2 of them off the top of my head, that are participating in professional learning now, so we're trying to be proactive on that. Still a lot to figure out. But
Yeah,
great questions.
Yeah, obviously, still a lot to work through. Yeah. Thank you for that.
Sorry, so you mentioned the applications for remote teachers for pre-K through 6, correct? How many applications did you get returned to you?
I don't remember how many.
We received 4 for the pre-K through 4 and 3 for the 5-6. We did have a meeting with those principals today and looked through some of that. So there's more discussion to come on what that will look like.
Okay.
Trying to recruit some additional teachers.
Sure. But it's interesting to know right off the bat, do we have a huge number of them trying to jump into remote or not, and what that kind of looks like, just to get a feel where we're at, because I think a lot of us, we just don't know yet.
Part of that, Mallory, is that we don't have a great handle still on what hybrid exactly looks like.
Sure.
And if people knew that, they may be more apt to make a decision one way or the other. But we're still working through all that stuff.
Right, you just gotta take that first step, so it's interesting to see what that step looks like.
So I just want to say too that both Jamie and Sheila are doing a good job in leading those two crews. They've helped on the stuff, a lot of hours put into making sure that the stuff that's put out is quality. Do you have anything else, Sheila, that you wanted to go over, the enrollment update?
I can do that.
Great.
I think that, while you were in executive session, Jody and I went ahead and uploaded the slide. My apologies for not having gotten that in there before, we started. But I'll pull it up on here and then hopefully you're able to see it on your screen as well too. Well, while it's coming up, the numbers that you're gonna see in here are based on what our September 20th count was in, 2019. It's listed by building. And so has all 10 of those there, and then, it's just taking a while. And then there's a second column that shows, as of today, the student data department helped me in, getting, those numbers for, so what you're seeing under 81720 would be the total enrollment.
Including remote.
Including remote, right. And then under the remote only column would be the number of students per building that has selected remote only. And so then that's how we were kind of getting an idea of like, okay, how many, staff members would we need, based on those numbers, with the anticipation that those families would stay committed to that for a semester at a time, just to kind of ease with all kinds of planning and consistency. I don't know why this isn't looking up, but it just keeps spinning. Are you able to see it on your computer?
Yeah.
Okay.
Are there students that we have still yet to get in touch with to commit to onsite or remote?
I think that we are pretty close to, I know when I was at high school today, Caleb, I think one of the administrators said down to like 23 for your building, does that sound about right?
Yeah, 23, but some of those haven't even enrolled, so they may not even be coming here. Probably 20 or less.
We're just having technical difficulties, but I'm glad you can at least see it on your screen.
So it looks like, when we add it all up, as of today, which this number will change one way or another, there's 726 remote, so about 22% of our kids have chosen remote only. So that's kind of what we were anticipating.
Anything else for Sheila?
Well, I have just a quick question.
Sure.
So, in terms of the high school enrollment numbers, that 1,057, that would be less the 209?
No.
209 is included in that.
Okay,
Remote's included in each one of those.
okay. So as far as space at the for social distancing, for like lunches.
Pretty rough,
Caleb's face.
pretty rough. I mean, that's one of the reasons when you look at that, they go hybrid before.
Yeah.
That's one of the, I hate to say positives, but one of the positives in terms of those kind of logistics.
So it does look like we have right now about a 3% drop of enrollment overall from our count day last year to our enrollment today. So we do see a decrease. Is that
I'll be
all in line?
surprised if it's only 3%, I'll be surprised.
No, I agree, I expect more.
Very good.
What is, and you might not know what our typical fluctuation is. And granted, we'll have some big years and smaller years, but is 3% significant for us? Or no? Do we know?
I couldn't tell you what.
And just looking from a budget perspective, it looks like it's been fairly flat, but it's really been around that 1.5% up or down.
Okay.
Mostly it goes down, but it's around, around that 1.5.
So will we have to revise our budget at any point to reflect
No.
numbers?
No, but this will affect our budget going forward into the next fiscal.
Yeah, I was gonna say, because I remember, I think the numbers are based off of were 34,
Yeah.
100 and something.
Yeah. And even then, I mean, the numbers may be going down right now, but I'd also provided that some sense of normalcy returns of the health care goes away, then I would also expect for us to see an increased staffing.
Well, but if they're not here on the count date, it doesn't matter.
But remember, next year's enrollment's gonna be based upon this year's or last year's. And so if you have a 1-year dip, I mean, the weightings are in here,
Right.
so you've got that 1-year grace. You know what I mean?
I got you, yeah.
Thank you for putting this together.
I'm curious, Sheila, looking at the elementary schools, all of them saw a little bit of a drop, especially Sunset and Southbridge. Is that consistent through the grades, or is that, or are you seeing more in any one particular area?
I think when we were looking by grade, that there seemed, no, I'm thinking of remote only. No, I don't know, Luke, on the breakdown by grade. I was thinking of remote only where we had more third graders that were choosing that option, but yeah, by grade, I don't know that.
Okay. I have a question about 4x4, Caleb, my goodness. I was wondering, so in 9 weeks, they're gonna fulfill a semester. So if a student wanted to, like your second semester of English, could you take that in the second 9 weeks, or are they only offering? See where I'm going with that?
Yeah, so the nice thing with the 4x4 is if you fail first semester, like English, say English, 9th grade English, there's actually a built-in credit recovery second semester by being offered both semesters. So you wouldn't be able to take it again second quarter, but you could take the whole class technically second semester if there's room for you.
So what if a student wanted to say take English 1 and English 2 in the same year, since we're doing?
You could if there were seats available. We obviously wouldn't let a freshman into a sophomore English unless there was room, but yeah, theoretically you could.
All right.
There's some advantages to students that want to move at a faster pace in the 4x4.
What would normally be a second semester course you would take in the second 9 weeks, I guess as well.
Yeah, if they're divvied up that way, yeah. There's so many different courses and what they, but yeah, there's a built-in credit recovery component in second semester, and there's also the ability to accelerate your learning if you're a student that has that ability.
Got about 10 other things for you guys, if you want. Sure you don't, but I'm sure you do. There's gonna be some other things we're gonna look at, like in terms of lunch arrangements, and I've just got those logistical items on your agenda there, you guys can see that. We may have to purchase some rectangular tables, in especially elementary classrooms. If we have to, we could go to desks. I hate kids eating lunch at desks. I only think of a little kid at the desk getting up and spilling everything from the desk, but we may have to look at some of that in order to be able to do the social distancing. They got those 5-foot round tables, and that was one of the reasons to relax some of the social distancing, is to maybe get more than one kid on a table perhaps. So there'll be some other additional costs we'll probably be incurring in terms of some of that stuff. We'd also like to add a couple of health aides, so we've got some sort of health coverage in the buildings, in all the buildings, all of the time, okay? And there's a cost associated with that. I have that in that motion down below. We might want to consider increasing, we have one part-time nurse and increasing them to full-time. You can see the cost there. I don't believe I put that in terms of a motion down below. I don't believe I did that. But that's something that, we would have them there all day. During this time, I think it's really important that we have health coverage all day when kids are at school, if at all possible. We're also looking to increase the hours of our days. That'll help with that morning coverage, help with temperatures, and things like that too, from 6.5 to 7 hours per day. Now, we have a cost associated with that of $63 grand. It's probably not going to be near that much, and the reason it won't be when you consider the contracts are about 6 days shorter anyway. But we didn't calculate that difference. We just, if we increased all things equal, this would be the cost. So it's not going to be that much, but we really do need that assistance. And once again, if we look at trying to reach out to outside entities or other locations and hiring additional aides, there will be more costs associated with those personnel if we can find them. And right now, I think we have like 8 positions open. 8 positions open, only about 16 applicants. So that might be one of our limiting factors is being able to find those personnel. Another thing too that we found, and this is, I just kind of reimbursement from Delta Dental. We received about $20,000 from Delta Dental for an April reimbursement. So those premiums for April. When we met about this, our thoughts are that we would like to be able to reimburse, because the district that's not any of the district's dollars. The district, I think we should try to reimburse that back to those staff members that paid those premiums. If you guys, unless you have a problem with that. Like I said, it's not our dollars, it's really those staff members, so I just wanted to put that in. It's COVID related because it was during the pandemic, because they didn't know where to have access. And then Dr. Decker is going to give a little bit of an update with Sparks and COVID money, where we are with those funds right now.
Who's ready to have fun with numbers?
Good.
All right. So things in the world of finance are actually going pretty good. So I hope you guys are pleased to see just the tremendous amount of aid, I think, that we're getting from different sources, but mostly federal funds and state funds. So this spreadsheet here will show you just kind of in general terms where we're at financially with our aid money. That ESSER is essentially CARES money, but there's different pots. There's CARES money for special education. There's the Sparks money, which is kind of that state-based, the money that you probably read about a little bit in the newspaper coming from the county. And then we also have this new partner company that came on board, the Central Kansas Community Foundation. Might have heard a little bit about them, but essentially some folks that are going out there and helping us by giving us actual mats to give out to students and to staff, as well as they're doing a fundraiser. So if you go onto their website, I'll plug it shamelessly into the camera, but if you go to their website, then there is a giving link in which you can give to support the school district by making a cash contribution, which we will turn around and purchase mats with. Because as you guys know, not all mats are equal. Some of them are cloth, some of them are shields, some of them you need to be able to see the mouth of the person talking. And so we're trying to get the teachers, especially, the exact kind of mats they need to do their job. And so thank you to the Central Kansas Community Foundation, because that's the kind of money that's going to help us be able to do that and provide us that flexibility. Now, back up to the expenses. You can see where we are with each type of expense. I also put a little note about, hey, this is how this expense is earmarked. It has a sunset date, or it has a date that we need to be aware of how we can use it. But overall, you can see, we're at nearly $1.4 million of aid, which is tremendous. And I'm especially proud of this figure right here, this $910,802 from Sparks money. So as many of you guys know, I come from Lawrence, and so that's a district that's 4 times the size of this district, and that's roughly what they got from Sparks. And so I think the package that Fred and I put together was excellent, and it's gonna serve the students of this district well. And so I'm really proud of that. But again, going down to about 1.4 million, we also have about $405,000 of pending requests. And so what this means is these are like students or principals or administrators saying, hey, I would like UV sanitation bonds to, to sanitize my equipment in PE. I put a spreadsheet together, we talk about those items one by one with the leadership team, we debate them, and then we go ahead and approve them, disapprove them, and find out more information. So this number represents all those things that are kind of in queue that still need a little bit more to be talked, so that we need to talk a little bit more about before we're ready to move them on to actual funding. But you can see that even with that, we're at about $216,000. This is important to you guys because any additional future funding needs, of course, we're going to try to use this money first to pay for those needs. But what I would prep you for is, especially if we get into, as the conversations about custodial care continue to grow, if we do get into that environment, then that's when there's no way around it, we're going to end up needing that contingency reserve fund. And I think it's a perfect use for it, number one, because it's a rainy day fund and the rain is here. So I think that's what those funds are meant to do. And so that's just a little prep that if that continues, that's what we'll have to be, because our margins on everything else are starting to get a lot tighter than what they were. But overall, in exceptional shape. And I know she didn't know I was going to do this, but Amber's back there. And one of the things that I was also proud of is that we had a special education audit, which for me was terrifying, because I tend to think of audits as a negative thing, but it wasn't. And I'll tell you that they were here for about 5 days, and the end result of it was there was a variance of about 1% from what they had recorded, what we had kept records of, what we had requested, and what the state said that we actually compared. So 1%. And that's exceptional. So to Amber and to Reagan, who's probably listening online, does an exceptional job of them. And again, what I was talking about when we were trying to talk about the budget is, I just think, especially for people at home, just to know that that's a great example of being excellent stewards of public dollars. And so we're really proud of that. I will take questions. Anyone?
Are we at all worried about not spending all of the Sparks money by the end of the year?
You Fred?
Well, because the available looks like a lot, but I'm assuming a lot of that is in the pending and.
Yeah, it's in the pending.
And so what we'll try to do with some of those is some of those ones that we have already spent in ESSER, if we can shift that expense over to the Sparks, we will try to do that to save the ESSER funds, since we've got till 2022 for that. But like I said, just talking a few minutes ago about looking at increasing some aids, looking at maybe trying to have facilities or some other things like that, it's going to eat through that pretty quick. So, or just buying tables. We're looking to purchase some picnic tables, or see if the city can loan us some picnic tables to eat outside and have some outdoor options. It's not going to.
It won't take long to spend it.
No, but the expenditures are solid. I mean, a lot of good stuff. One thing too, the masks, but there's like 720 masks from students and staff that have been donated thus far. That's pretty cool. That's a lot of stuff, folks. I know that it's a lot to go through. If you have questions, reach out. We'll do our best to answer them. So, unless you have more, you've got some written reports in there and putting in on activities and business. That's all I have, Mr. President.
Okay. Next item is Kaasb recommended policy revisions adoption.
Two sets of them there, or two different motions. One is a motion for first read, the other one, in new business, needs to be an approval. So, these are just updated policies dealing with the categories that are listed: tobacco-free schools, negotiations representatives, and most of them are revised. There's two new policies: tobacco-free school grounds for visitors, and then a complaints regarding nutrition. So this would be first reading to be approved next month. And Joni has gone through these and,
So that's, for A is seven A is a first read.
yes.
And then seven B is where you
We need approval
for that.
Yeah.
So then the next item is seven B. Does anybody have any questions on that? I entertain a motion.
I move to approve the KASB recommended policy changes for GAAB, complaints of discrimination, and GAAC, sexual harassment.
Second.
Moved and seconded, all those in favor? Seven oh. Approve negotiated agreement, MOU. And, does anybody have any questions on this?
I don't, the MOU isn't attached, is it?
No, it's incorporated into the document itself. All of those items are listed in there, in the negotiated agreement. So essentially what you're doing is reapproving the 2020, or 1920, because we've not negotiated the 2021. But every one of those items is vetted separately in that negotiated agreement. Mr. Rock put those together and Kathleen approved it, or was cool with how that's all set.
Any other questions? Entertain a motion.
I move to approve the amended 2019-20 negotiated agreement and MOU as presented.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any other questions, discussion? All those in favor? Seven oh. And then within that, we need somebody on the face mask committee, and Melissa's going to do that. Approve adjustments to EO 2059.
This is the executive order that I sent out last week, and we sent it out to all staff as well. Once again, it's just to give us a little flexibility within our context. I know I've seen somebody said that we were gonna allow social distancing to only be 3 feet. That is not accurate. I saw that on the social media page. What we just needed to be able to do is just to have a little bit more flexibility as it relates to some of this, and that's the reason to put that in there. There's two more pieces there. The one was with hand sanitizer. Instead of it saying every hour, we're saying every hour or class period. So for block scheduling at the high school, it gives them a little more flexibility to not interrupt that block in the middle. And the last thing deals with the temperature screens. We want to do temperature screens. We're going to do temperature screens. It's just that we don't want our kids to have to wait outside while we're doing those temperature screens. So that gives us that flexibility. So I just want to make that really, really clear.
And I'll just add another little piece to that, that I keep getting emails asking us to require masks. We've approved that a long time ago. We're not taking that out of this.
No.
There's no concern, no worry for that. So that's never been on the table to be removed.
Okay. I'll entertain a motion.
I'll move to approve the adjustments to Executive Order 20-59 as presented.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All those in favor? Seven. All right. Approve remote learner assurances document.
This is a requirement from the Kansas State Department of Education for us to have the remote learning option. We have to have those assurances, the board president has to sign on them, you just need to have them ready for that.
Any questions on that? Okay, entertain a motion.
I move to approve remote learning assurances document to ensure all requirements will be addressed by Newton Public Schools as presented.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All those in favor? Seven. Approve addition of 2 nurse aide positions. And we've already talked about this. Does anybody?
Just real quick, so this, adding these two puts a health person at every building all day?
Well, in order to make it every building all day, we would have to also increase that part-time nurse to
Right.
full-time for this year.
Okay,
So that would be the only, if you would want to add that to that motion, I would darn sure make that happen.
I have no problem with that. We've got it.
I would feel so much better if we could do that. I think our teachers would feel better, I know our administrators would feel better, I know our office assistants would feel better.
So are you okay with adding that to the motion?
I move to approve the hiring of 2 health aides for USD 373 and moving the part-time nurse to full-time hours for the 2020-21 school year as requested.
Moved and seconded, any discussion on that? Okay, all those in favor? Say no. High school graduation day.
Just wanted to let you guys, it wasn't on the calendar, I think the 22nd of May, I believe, Mr. Smith would like to have high school graduation, so just a point of information. I guess you've never approved that in the past, so we thought we'd just make you aware if there's any other plans that we can have graduation. Not sure what Mother's Day, it's usually looking before.
We request no pandemic this year. Or this next year.
Okay, the next item is board comments. Luke?
Just thank you to all the staff who's working hard, getting us through this, getting us ready for the school year to start. Much appreciated, and we're looking forward to the school year.
Yes, thank you to the district staff, the teachers, everyone involved in this. I think there's some positive things that are coming out of this, and as hard as the work has been, I feel like we're all together in this and working hard to make it happen, so thank you, everyone.
I would just say thank you again to all of the district staff who's working so hard. Staff members who came back for the first time this week. Hopefully it feels good to have 1 week under your belts. I know it's hard what we're doing. Just gotta take that first step, even though we don't know what the whole journey's gonna look like. I'm excited for this year coming up. I think we have a great team that we're working with, so I personally feel very comforted knowing the staff that we have. It helps me sleep at night, so thank you. I really appreciate everything you do.
Well, I just wanted to give a EBF compliment. That's everybody but Fred. Because he does not like compliments. But when you get a chance, Fred, would you please tell your staff that they're doing a great job? Okay? I'm very impressed. This is high-pressure stuff. People are working really, really hard, and it's very impressive to watch it all come together. I'm just flabbergasted. So you guys are doing great, and keep up the good work. And don't tell Fred I said he was doing a good job. Okay? All right. Anyways, thank you very much. And with that,
I move to adjourn.
Second.
okay. All in favor? Thank you.